One amazing story. In 7 months, students in a classroom for children with reading difficulties increased their collective reading score from 20% to 70% using the same technology that you are introduced here, text-to-speech technology. This story, Kindling a Passion for Literature, was published in May of 2012 in a journal, Learning and Leading with Technology, published by the International Society for Technology in Education. I interviewed the author of this amazing story, Gigi Witteside, an assistive technology specialist for Fulton County, Georgia, USA. This text is being read aloud by the app VoiceStream Reader, which is one of the apps that Gigi recommends to her students. In the story, Kindling a Passion for Literature, Gigi tells the heartwarming story of how Kindles with text-to-speech function transformed the lives of her students with learning difficulties. Gigi is very passionate about helping children with learning disabilities. We can learn a lot from Gigi's stories. Let's hear Gigi now.
That's my favorite story to tell. That was I was teaching in high school. I had a 9th grade, what we call an IRR, or a resource class, and they're students with learning disabilities that will keep them from participating fully in a non-supported general ed class. So we had a smaller group of kids. None of my students, I had, in one class I had about 14, 15 students. None of the students had ever read an entire novel in their lives. And so Kindle had just come out, and it was the very first it was the old Kindle version with the keyboard at the bottom. And I started playing around with it. And I had one student that had some pretty extensive assistive technology needs, and she had a subscription at that time to Bookshare. And then she had some software that we no longer use, but it's called Kurzweil. It's a big, sweet, kind of a very big, clunky software at the time, back in I think it was 2009. And I saw how much she benefited from having that technology read aloud to her. But I couldn't, it was very expensive, that technology at that time. So I couldn't afford to get it for every student in my class. So then it was just kind of serendipitous that I came across the read aloud function in those legacy Kindle devices. And so once I saw that, I thought, I bet I could get these kids to listen to books that they chose. And so we, at our high schools, or at all the schools here in Fulton County, our PTA, our Parent Teacher Association, offers mini grants throughout the year for teachers to help fund special projects that they have in their classroom. So I had applied for a mini grant for the Kindles, and then for enough money for each of the kids to choose 4 books total, 2 books per semester. And so it was fun because we did the whole, we went to Amazon.com. They put in one book, that they enjoyed listening to, or they knew about it. And then we had everybody look down at the, the bottom of the screen for the suggestions of titles you may like if you enjoyed this book. And so I had the students research those books, and then we, just drilled it down to their 4 top. And then I submitted the mini grant. So the kids, we all got those Kindles and arrived into the classroom. You would have thought it was Christmas type of holiday where you received managing the titles of the books. We had a blast because we read a lot. And 2 of the events that were the most moving for me, literally emotionally for me as a teacher, I had been a teacher for 15 years at that time, was my students were in class before I was, and they were all sitting around, and I was out. We have to monitor the hallway. And we had been reading. They were all very much into the Catching Fire series. So a lot of them had downloaded those books, The Hunger Games. And so I walked into the classroom, and they had pulled their chairs up to one another, and they were all sitting there discussing the Hunger Games book. And I walked in and just paused, and I thought, I have never walked into my resource classroom with students with learning disabilities and seen them create this without my instruction, this reading discussion of what they were reading and what they thought the characters were going to do. And they were arguing about, no, that's not why he did that. And, she volunteered to be a tribute because of this. And it was just so organic that I was just really moved by how powerful that was for them to all connect with that. And the next thing that happened, this is all besides the test scores, because that to me was, although that's very important because I could prove that it was working, but it was these organic conversations that were really the most moving for me. And I had this one student who was he had some discipline issues in some other classes. And so they have a like a little detention center if the student has to be separated all day for, different deeds and acts, but it's called in-school suspension. And so we passed one another in the hallway, and he gets probably it was in between classes, so there weren't many kids in the hallway. So he gets about 20 yards from me, and he turns around and yells very loudly. He said, "Miss Whiteside, are we going to get to read in class today?" And for him to say, "Do we get to read?" instead of "we have to read," was a big deal. And I said, "Yes, we're going to read today. I'm sorry, we're going to miss you." And he's like, "Can you please have somebody bring my Kindle to the ISS room because I don't want to miss it." And that was when I said, "Sure, you got it, no problem." And then I stepped into the teacher's mail room and just tears. It was just so powerful for me to have that student ask for materials, because the students have a nickname for that acronym for in-school suspension, ISS. They call it in-school sleeping. So they go there and they just put their heads down and they sleep. So for him to ask for some work, let alone a student with a reading disability, and he wants his Kindle so that he can stay up with his peers reading the Hunger Games, that was a big deal. So then, of course, the rest is history. We did the testing at the end of the year, and their testing scores had gone up, and it was very powerful.
Thank you, Gigi. I know this is a fantastic story. One thing I'd like to let me tell a story about your story, this Kindle passion for literature. So I first read it in 2012, right? And it brought me a lot of validation, because let me tell maybe a little bit of my story. So I always like to learn, and I'm I'm a physician. So physicians are, or teachers, professionals, we're supposed to read books, right, and to learn.
Right.
And as used to be the main way to do it. And I always wanted to learn, and as I learned a lot as a child, I went to medical school, but reading was always hard. It was not, again, I wanted to learn, so I forced myself to read it because I want to learn, but it was not always easy, right? So when I had the chance to start listening to audiobooks, and I started having opportunity when I was an adult, I started opening more the possibility to have to read more than to listen to audiobooks. And then I heard about the Kindle, and that was in 2010. So it was 12 years ago, right? And they're like, okay, there was a Kindle, has text-to-speech technology. That would look interesting, right? And I thought, in the beginning, I was a little bit suspicious about technology because I thought I was being cheated, because I say, I'm going to pay for the book, I'm not going to have the book. I was like, oh, what's this? And so I thought was not, I felt it was something a little bit maybe not completely honest. I don't think like that anymore, but okay. So, okay, decided to give it a try. And Gigi, I think looking back, I think all these years using the Kindle, I think the Kindle is the device has had the most positive influence in my adult life. The device, because it really was caused a revolution in my life. Because of the Kindle with use the text to speech, I have been able to read a lot more. I probably read 3-4 times more than I would read if I didn't have the Kindle. I have read over the last 12 years a lot more than I read in the other 36 years of my life. So it's really, it's amazing how much I learned. Since I bought the Kindle, I have not read any book in paper by itself. Always, all the books are electronic or audio or both together, right? Synchronized. Sometimes I use also the apps that take picture and then read a lot of the books, right? Your story then, so I know I read your story then in 2012. So 2 years after I started using the Kindle, I was like, yes, I see that's true. Yes, I see that. Yes, I was like, and I start sharing your story to all the families I see in my office. So I have shared the story, Kindle Passion for Literature, hundreds of times since over these years. So, and I have seen several times, kids that will never read. And then after tell the story, parents then buy the Kindle and kids start reading. They come back, say, "Oh, doctor, look, I can read now." It's just so beautiful. It's just beautiful. It's like it was like, wow, this is amazing. So I really, that's why the reason I really want to talk with you one day, right? And so I thought, okay, let's talk this year. It's 10 years after I got the paper and also have the YouTube channel. So definitely I have to interview you. Thank you. So next question is, what is the technology that you have observed has had the biggest positive impact on children's reading skills?
I would have to say that it's the highlighting of the text when it's being read aloud digitally, that highlighting, that tracking, that so when we do have a student who has a reading disability, we know through research that by having them just be able to track something that's highlighted as it's being read aloud for them will help them, get their eyes trained to follow those words, and it will help with their fluency. And I think that part is even more important than whether it sounds like a human voice or whether it's a synthesized voice. The voices that come with the read alouds now have, they're so much better than they used to be. But the whole idea, because even at that time, the highlighting in the Kindle was pretty rudimentary. But I think that's the biggest point. And one other caveat that I felt was really powerful with the Kindle was not just for students. Some of my students didn't have a reading disability. They qualified, they were eligible for special education services through what we call other help impaired. And so those students may have had some pretty severe cases of ADHD or ADD. And those students told me that by having the text framed smaller on that device, that they were able to pay attention more, and they felt like they could focus longer on a tablet because they weren't busy looking at how many pages were left behind that. They weren't distracted by the cover or looking back or looking forward or just the tactile feel of the book. And that was a secondary impact that I did not expect, but that was a huge deal.
Gigi, so you wrote the article Keenly and Passion for Literature was published in 2012, so 10 years ago. Have your opinion about using the Kindle with text-to-speech changed anyway since this 10 years, or in what way has changed, if it has changed?
It has changed. It has changed a little bit. I do agree that if you are going to designate a reading device, if it's just a designated device that is just for reading, I think the Kindle is a great way to go. But in the position that I hold professionally in the school district, we are looking for, we want a device that's able to do a lot of different things. And so we work primarily with, we use iPads and we use student laptops, and we have Chrome extensions and accessibility features on those devices that we use to promote the text to speech. But I do know that because of that focus element being a lot stronger when you have that Kindle and that attention, especially with older students, and even with adults, it's difficult for me to read a book, a Kindle app on my smartphone, because all of a sudden I get a notification that I got an email or somebody posted something, and I'll get off. It's so much easier for me to get off my task if I don't have that designated reading device. It was just the other devices for an academic environment to help support content in science and in math, and have digital organization and folders online with those tools layered in. It was just a lot more efficient for us to go with a laptop and layering in those accessibility features. However, I do have students who have been who have had such significant attention issues that's not a reasonable strategy for them to have a laptop or an iPad and focus on reading. So using the Kindle as a designated device, along with their WhisperSync, which is super powerful, and how it now that they've purchased Audible.com, I do have students who will tell me, I'll set up a Bookshare account for them, which is a free digital library for people with print disabilities, and the students will say, that's okay, but my family, we have an Audible account and I just prefer to use that. So they have their own, they use their own designated device at home for their leisure reading, and they like the way that it uses WhisperSync and with the Audible titles. And they have the human readers, often the professional actors reading those, and you really can't, those are superior to any synthesized voice.
Thank you, Gigi. Yeah, I have the same opinion about the WhisperSync is really really the best. Because you have a human voice, right? Synchronized with the words, and the words are highlighted. That's the top. That's the best you can do it, right? But
Right.
but like you said, like the text to speech have come a long way, right? Since the initial Kindle, the Kindle, the 2009, 2010, they was very robotic, right? But
Right.
still, even with that Kindle, you saw this amazing transformation so many kids, right? So the next question is, Amazon does not manufacture the Kindle keyboard anymore. Now they have the Kindle Fire and the Kindle Paperwhite or similar models that are the Kindle and the Kindle Oasis. Basically, there is the Kindle Fire that's like a tablet, but as a tablet itself is limited, right? It has some tablet function, but it's not at the level, of course, of iPad or a good Android device, right? So my question for you: which of these two main devices we have of the Kindle family now, two you think is easier for children to use?
I think the Kindle Fire is easier for them to use. I feel it's more intuitive, it's more responsive on the touchscreen. I have a Paperwhite myself that I read, and I selected that primarily because I can read it outside. So when I'm outdoors, I'm sitting on the deck or at a pool, and I don't have that glare or the reduced vision that the Fire does because of the pixels on the screen and the color and all that type of thing. So I would, for the purpose of instruction and for reading, I would go with the Kindle Fire. I think it's a more intuitive device for students than the Paperwhite.